The phone rang just as Jason slammed a stack of reports onto the desk. I don't care how much the other side adds, the valuation model stays. If the premium exceeds 15%, we pull out. He hung up the call and rubbed his temples. Spread across the desk was a thick pile of documents. The Ruixin Technology AI chip acquisition case, with the bid due in 3 days and rival Yuan Phone Capital breathing down his neck. The word breathing only made him more irritable. Michael pushed the door open, his expression odd. Mr. Jason, the police station called. Jason didn't even look up. Let legal handle legal matters. It's not a legal matter. Michael swallowed hard. They said your daughter is with them. Jason's pen paused mid-signature. What? A 4-year-old girl flew in from Paris all by herself. The entry stamp says, unaccompanied minor. No matter what we asked her, she wasn't scared at all. Just said she wanted to find her dad. And his name is Jason. We showed her the photo album, and she recognized you immediately. This kid. She's way too calm. Several of my colleagues were completely stunned. The conference room fell silent for 3 seconds. Jason put down his pen, stood up expressionlessly, and said, let's go. Jing'an District Police Station, reception room. When Jason pushed the door open, he saw a little girl sitting on a chair, her legs dangling, unable to reach the ground. She was holding a carton of strawberry milk, drinking it with great focus. 2 police officers nearby exchanged bewildered glances. It's her. The female officer who brought him in whispered. This kid is too eerie. She didn't cry or make a fuss the whole time, and she even recited pi for us. Over 300 digits before we couldn't take it anymore. The little girl looked up. Jason froze. Those eyes, clear, gentle, so much like someone. The little girl stared back at him, tilting her head, and said in a babyish voice, Are you Jason? I am. Then I'll call you Daddy. Jason? He instinctively looked at the police officer. The female officer handed him a document folder. These are what she had with her, her passport, birth certificate, and a letter. Jason opened the folder. On the birth certificate, under the mother's name, it read, Wendy. His fingers tightened slightly. Where's your mother? He asked, his voice much lower than usual. The little girl took another sip of her strawberry milk and said calmly, Mom's working in Paris. I flew here by myself. By yourself? I wore an unaccompanied minor badge. She pointed to the small card hanging around her neck. The airline had full escort service. During the layover, an auntie took me to the bathroom, but I handled everything else on my own. Jason took a deep breath. 4 years old, flying alone from Paris to Shanghai with a layover. He suddenly felt that this kid was something else entirely. What's your name? Ivy. The little girl put down the milk carton and wiped her mouth with a napkin. Her movements extremely precise. Contentment brings happiness. Satisfaction brings peace of mind. Mom named me Ivy. Jason silently repeated the name in his mind, and somewhere in his chest, something suddenly clenched. We need to do a DNA test, he said to the police officer. It's already been arranged, expedited. Results in 2 hours. The wait felt unbearably long. Ivy sat beside Jason, her little legs swinging back and forth, when suddenly she reached out and tugged at his sleeve. The color of your tie is off. Jason looked down at her. A navy blue suit should be paired with a silver gray tie. That deep purple one of yours is too flashy. It doesn't look right, Ivy said with a serious tone. The police officer nearby nearly burst out laughing. Jason was silent for 5 seconds. You're 4. 4 years, 3 months, and 7 days. Ivy corrected him. Don't round it off. It's not precise. Michael was already struggling to hold back his laughter. 2 hours later, the DNA results came out. Probability of parent-child relationship, 99.9999%. Jason stared at the report for a long time. Ivy jumped down from the chair, looked up at him, and suddenly reached out, wrapping her hand around his pinky finger. Daddy, let's go home. Jason's Adam's apple moved. He looked down at that tiny hand, but another image flashed through his mind. 5 years ago, a rainy night, Wendy stood at the door of his apartment, drenched, her eyes red, shoving a letter into his hand. Don't look for me. Then she turned and ran into the rain. He chased after her, but the street corner was empty. He still hadn't opened that letter to this day. Jason snapped back to the present and picked Ivy up. The little girl was so light it made his heart ache. Let's go, he said, his voice a little hoarse. Home. Michael followed behind, watching his boss carry a little person out of the police station, his mouth forming an O shape. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to the legal department. Delete the note about childless fate in the contract. Jason carried Ivy into the car, and the child safety seat in the back was one Michael had bought on the fly from the mall. Ivy climbed in, buckled herself up with a practiced ease that tugged at the heart. Do you often ride in cars by yourself? Jason asked. When Mom's busy, I take a taxi to kindergarten by myself. Jason's grip on the steering wheel tightened. A Parisian taxi lets a 4-year-old ride alone? No, but I told the driver I was a dwarf, and they didn't care. Jason, he turned to glance at his daughter. Ivy's face was expressionless, utterly serious. Jason looked away and started the car. In the rearview mirror, Ivy was gazing out at the nightscape of Shanghai, murmuring softly, brighter than Paris. Jason didn't respond, but he slowed the car down a little. What he didn't know was that Ivy had a piece of paper in her pocket, hand-drawn with crayons, with crooked letters that read, KPI Evaluation Form, Candidate, Jason, current score, 310. Notes. Thai taste deducted points, but his hands didn't shake when he held me, so 1 point added. Jason woke up at 6. Not because of his biological clock, but because a little person was standing by his bed, staring straight at him. You're awake, Ivy said, her tone like she was stating an experimental result. You snore when you sleep, about 60 decibels, which is considered mild. Jason, he sat up and rubbed his face. He had stayed up too late last night and forgotten to close the curtains, letting the sunlight stream straight in. What time did you get up? 5:27. Ivy handed him a glass of water. I boiled some milk. It's in the kitchen. You'll have to pour your own coffee. I'm not tall enough to reach the coffee machine. Jason took the glass, stunned for a moment. This kid boiled milk on her own? He walked to the kitchen and saw a small pot on the stove, the milk still warm. Next to it, 2 cups were neatly arranged, one big, one small. A sticky note was stuck to the big cup, with crooked handwriting. For Dad. Jason stared at those 2 words for several seconds. Michael took the day off today, he said to Ivy. I'll find you a babysitter. No. Ivy sat at the dining table, her short legs unable to reach the floor. The nannies aren't professional. How many nannies have you met? Mom hired 3, and I fired them all. Ivy counted on her fingers. The first one cooked terribly, the second always wanted to teach me to read. I already knew 2,000 characters by the time I was 3, and she was teaching me big and small, a waste of time. The third. What about the third? She stole Mommy's earrings. Jason's brow furrowed. Mommy called the police, but later let it go. Ivy took a sip of milk, leaving a ring of milk mustache on her upper lip. Mommy's too soft-hearted. You can't let things like that slide even once, or it'll happen again. Jason looked at the milk mustache on his daughter's lip, reached for a tissue, and handed it to her. Ivy took it and wiped it herself. You're wiping it wrong, Jason said. You need to. I know, from the center outward. Ivy wiped it again. Mom taught me. At the mention of Mom, both of them fell silent for a moment. Jason made a call and asked the housekeeping agency to send 3 nannies for interviews. The first one, with 10 years of experience, was a gold medal maternity matron. Ivy asked, Can you make croissants? The matron was taken aback. No, I specialize in Chinese cuisine. Next. The second one, a returnee childcare specialist with a master's degree. Ivy asked, What is the 4th stage of Piaget's theory of cognitive development? The specialist was stumped. Next. The third candidate, a retired preschool teacher, was gentle and kind. Ivy asked, How many prime numbers are there from 1 to 100? The teacher counted on her fingers for a long time. Ivy sighed and looked at Jason. Dad, let's just forget it. I'll take care of myself, you take care of yourself, and we won't bother each other. Jason stared at this 4-year-old little person and suddenly felt like a complete failure. Then, how about a tutor? Should I hire a tutor for you? Ivy tilted her head, thinking for a moment. Okay, but I want to interview them. The tutor they hired was a graduate student in mathematics from Fudan University, brimming with confidence. Little one, how about we learn some addition? Ivy looked at him, blinked and asked, What's 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 100? The tutor paused for a moment. 50-50. Using Gauss's summation method? Right. Do you know the derivation process of the arithmetic series, some formula? The tutor's forehead began to sweat. Half an hour later, the tutor left. Before leaving, he pulled Michael aside and said, This kid of yours isn't 4 years old. She's 40, isn't she? Michael gave a wry smile. I'd like to know that myself. In the afternoon, Jason faced the greatest challenge of his life. Tying Ivy's hair. Just a ponytail. Ivy sat in front of the vanity and handed him a hair tie. Mom usually does it for me. Jason took the hair tie and looked at the fine, soft strands of hair, feeling for the first time that his fingers wouldn't obey him. First attempt, crooked. 2 centimeters higher on the left. Second attempt. Too loose, falling apart. You don't have enough strength in your hands. You should practice your grip more. Third attempt. Pulled her hair. Ow, gentle. Ivy rubbed her sore scalp, sighed, and said in her baby voice, "Forget it. I'll do it myself." She picked up the hair tie and tied it up in a few quick, neat motions. Jason stood nearby, silent. "I'll do better next time." Ivy glanced at him, said nothing, but the corner of her mouth curved slightly. That evening, Jason was in the study handling merger and acquisition documents. The door creaked open a crack, and Ivy poked half her head in. "Daddy, what are you doing?" "Working. Can I take a look?" Jason hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Ivy climbed onto the sofa and stood on her tiptoes to peer at the documents on the table, the acquisition case for Ruecore Technologies' AI chips, evaluation model. She stared at it for about 2 minutes, tilting her head as if pondering something. "Daddy. This number." She pointed at a row of data on the spreadsheet. "Shouldn't it be a bit bigger?" Jason was taken aback. "Which one?" "This one." Ivy pointed at the discount rate column. "Mom said before when she was working on projects, if a company's stuff can easily be outdone by something newer, then this number needs to be bigger. She called it, what was it? Risk. Risk premium adjustment?" Jason's breath suddenly quickened. "Yes, that's the one." Ivy nodded, looking serious. "Mom also said that if you don't adjust it, that value you calculate, she called it N something V, would be off." Jason stared at the row of data she pointed to, his mind racing. He recalculated. Cold sweat trickled down his back. If he revised it based on the idea of increasing the risk premium, the entire valuation model would need to be redone, and the bidding strategy would have to be adjusted. But if he didn't revise it and stuck with the original model, as long as the opponent spotted the same flaw, they could strike with precision. Jason slowly turned his head, looking at the 4-year-old little figure on the sofa. Ivy hugged a small bunny plush, tilting her head to look at him, her expression innocent. "What's wrong? Did I say something wrong?" Jason opened his mouth, only to find himself at a loss for words. He had been an investor for 10 years, had reviewed countless models, and had led entire teams. Today, a 4-year-old had pointed out a fatal flaw in just 2 minutes. "You didn't say anything wrong." His voice was a bit dry. "How do you know all this?" "Mom taught me," Ivy said. "Mom often used these data models when she was working on projects in Paris. She taught me like it was a game. She said you have to calculate the probability and returns before making any decision. Otherwise, it's just gambling." Jason closed his eyes. "Wendy." Even teaching their daughter followed the same logic. "Anything else?" he asked. Ivy watched for another 2 minutes, this time pointing out 3 spots she found a bit off. Jason checked them one by one. All 3 pointed to the same issue. The risk parameters in the model had been set too optimistically. Jason leaned back in his chair, stared at the ceiling, and let out a sudden laugh. "What are you laughing at?" "I was thinking," Jason looked down at his daughter, "if you had been around for my past investment decisions, how much more money I could have made." Ivy thought for a moment, seriously counting on her fingers for a while, then said, "A lot." Jason laughed again. This time it was a genuine laugh. Ivy looked at his smile, then reached into her pocket and felt for the piece of paper. KPI Evaluation Form. Candidate. Jason. Current score. 510. Notes. Points deducted for tying hair, but points added for smiling. Immediately admitting mistakes upon discovery. Plus 2 points. The bid meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning. By the time Jason arrived, the people from Yuan Phone Capital were already there. Derek was wearing a custom Italian suit, his tie a flashy burgundy red. When he saw Jason walk in, a smile curled at the corner of his mouth. "Mr. Jason, I heard you've recently added a new member to your family?" Jason walked over with a blank expression. "You're well informed. It's all over the circle." Derek patted him on the shoulder. "I heard it's a 4-year-old girl? From Paris." Jason kept his hands in his pockets and didn't respond. "Speaking of which, back then, that fortune teller said you had a childless fate, and I thought it was a joke." Derek leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice. "Now it seems either the fortune teller was right or—" He didn't finish his sentence, but his grin was insufferably smug. Jason stared at him, his gaze as cold as ice. "Mr. Derek, see you at the bidding table." He turned and walked into the conference room. Michael followed behind, muttering under his breath, "That guy's got a real smart mouth." Jason said nothing, but his thumb lightly brushed against his ring finger. The bidding began. The executives of Ruecore Technology sat across from them, with both sides taking turns presenting their proposals. Yuan Phone Capital's plan was aggressive, with a high bid and a flashy integration strategy. When it was Jason's turn, he opened the valuation model and began his explanation. Just 3 minutes into his presentation, an analyst from Derek's side suddenly interrupted. Mr. Jason, isn't there a bit of an issue with your discount rate assumption? Jason paused. The analyst stood up, walked over to the projection, and pointed at the data. The industry average risk coefficient you used is 1.2. But Ruecor's technical roadmap differs from the mainstream, with higher iteration risks. This coefficient should be at least 1.4 or above. The conference room fell silent for a moment. Jason's team exchanged glances. If we recalculate with 1.4, the analyst continued, your valuation would drop by at least 12%, and the pricing advantage would be gone. Derek leaned back in his chair, grinning like a fox that had just stolen a chicken. Jason stared at the screen, his hand under the table quietly opening his phone. Ivy was having breakfast at home. Strawberry milk, a croissant, and a small plate of fruit. Her phone rang. She picked it up and glanced at it. A message from Jason. A screenshot of the valuation model. She opened it, stared at it for about 10 seconds, then stuffed the croissant into her mouth, held the phone with both little hands, typed a few words and sent them back. Jason's phone buzzed. He glanced down. Ivy had sent just one line. Just increase the big number a little bit. Mom said when the market is good, you can adjust it less. Jason stared at the line, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Mr. Derek, he began, his voice steady. Your analyst is right. The discount rate does need adjustment. Derek's smile stiffened. But you've overlooked one thing. Jason stood up and walked over to the projection screen. The market risk premium can be lowered. Although the iteration risk for Ruecor's technology route is high, their market acceptance is also high. Over the past 3 quarters, their customer growth rate has been twice the industry average. He pulled up a set of data and projected it onto the screen. So the final upward adjustment to the discount rate is 1.2%, not the 3% you mentioned. Derek's analyst's face changed color. Moreover, Jason continued, according to the revised model, our offer actually has an advantage. He opened a new proposal. The entire room fell silent. The executives of Ruexian Technology whispered among themselves, discussing in low voices. Derek's face turned from red to white, and then from white to green. Mr. Jason, the CEO of Ruexian Technology stood up. Your proposal is very convincing. Jason nodded. We also have an integration plan. Ruexian's team can retain 70% of the equity incentives, and the core technical staff will not have their positions adjusted for 3 years. The HR director of Ruexian's eyes lit up. Derek stood up abruptly. We could also. Mr. Derek, Ruexian's CEO interrupted him. In your proposal, 30% of the core technical staff would be laid off. Derek froze. In the meeting room, everyone was looking at Jason. Jason's face was expressionless, but under the table, his hands clenched into fists. Do we need to continue the discussion? He asked. The CEO of Raychip shook his head. No need. We accept Yanqing Capital's proposal. Derek threw down his pen and turned to leave. Just before walking out the door, he glanced back at Jason, his eyes filled with malice. Jason pretended not to notice. That evening, Jason returned home. Ivy sat on the sofa, clutching her rabbit plush toy, not even looking at him. Did you win? She asked. I won. Oh. Jason walked over and sat down beside her. Thank you. Ivy buried her face in the rabbit plush toy, her voice muffled. You're welcome. You're my dad. Jason looked at her back, then suddenly reached out and ruffled her hair. Ivy didn't pull away. The two of them sat quietly for a while. Daddy, Ivy said. Ivy looked down at the rabbit plushie in her arms, her voice small. Why did Mommy leave you? She loves me. She calls me every day, sends me goodnight texts every night, but she never talks about you. Every time I ask about you, she just goes quiet. She finally looked up, her eyes a little red. Did you do something bad? Jason's hand froze. He looked at his daughter, his throat feeling like it was clogged with something. No, he said, his voice as soft as a whisper. I haven't done anything wrong. Neither has your mother. Then why don't you live together? Jason opened his mouth, then closed it again. How could he explain? 5 years ago, Wendy had left without leaving a single contact address, without a phone number that could be reached. He had searched for her for an entire year. Paris, London, New York, every place she might have gone. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth. Only now did he learn that she had gone to Paris, given birth to their daughter, raised her alone for 4 years, yet never once contacted him. Because, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, adults sometimes make mistakes. Your mother thought leaving was protecting me. She didn't know. I wanted to protect her too. Ivy stared at him, as if digesting his words. Then she asked, Did you look for her? I did, Jason said. For an entire year. Every place I could think of. I never stopped. Then why did you stop looking? Jason's jaw tightened. He looked away, gazing at the Shanghai skyline outside the window. Because I found a letter she left for me, he said, his voice dropping lower. On the envelope, it said, Jason, don't look for me. And I was too afraid to open it. Afraid of what? Afraid. He turned back, looking into her eyes. Afraid that once I open it, I'll have to accept that she really doesn't want to be found. Ivy stared at him for a long time. Then she said, Daddy, you're so silly. Jason was stunned. What? Mom loves you, Ivy said, her tone as if stating a fact. She still keeps your photo on her nightstand. I've seen it. She just doesn't know how to come back. Jason froze. Those words were like a needle, gently pricking a place deep in his heart that he had hidden away for a long time. She didn't know how to come back, so it wasn't that she didn't want to, but that she couldn't. His Adam's apple moved as he tried to say something, but his voice got stuck in his throat. Ivy tilted her head to look at him. Dad, your eyes are red. Jason turned his face away and blinked hard. No, they're not. Yes, Ivy said. But I'm not telling Mom. Jason's lips twitched slightly at her words. He took a deep breath, turned back, and looked seriously into his daughter's eyes. I'll find her, I promise. Ivy stared at him for a few seconds, as if evaluating the weight of that promise. Then she nodded. Then you'd better hurry. Mom's KPI review isn't done yet. Jason was taken aback. What KPI? Secret. Ivy jumped off the sofa, clutching her rabbit as she ran toward her room. She stopped at the doorway, turned back, and added, I'll tell you tomorrow. Jason watched her retreating figure and reached into his pocket. Inside was a photo, a picture of him and Wendy at an architecture exhibition 5 years ago. She was smiling sweetly, and he was looking at the camera, his eyes only for her. He flipped the photo over. On the back was a line he had written back then. Wendy, I'll chase you for the rest of my life. Now all he wanted to do was change that line to, Wendy, you owe me an explanation. 5 years ago, Jason wasn't yet Mr. Jason. Back then, he had just founded Yanqing Capital with an office of only 200 square meters, a team of 7 people, and small cases to handle. That day, he attended an architecture exhibition in search of a new project, a commercial real estate renovation plan. Then he saw Wendy. She was standing in front of a model, dressed in a simple white shirt and jeans, her long hair tied back in a ponytail, explaining her design to a few people. Architecture isn't a cold, lifeless shell. It's a vessel that carries life, she said, her voice clear and bright. The core of this project is to make the people who live here feel a sense of belonging. Jason stood at the back of the crowd watching her profile. Sunlight streamed down through the skylight, falling on her face like a painting. At that moment, he had only one thought. This woman, I have to get to know her. Later, he came up with all sorts of excuses. Miss Wendy, I really admire your design philosophy. How about a collaboration? Miss Wendy, we could work on this project together. Miss Wendy, let me take you to dinner, and we can talk about design. Wendy turned him down every time with a smile. Mr. Jason, your project is too commercial for me. Mr. Jason, I can't take on such a big case. Mr. Jason, I've already eaten. Jason was rejected 7 times. On the 8th, he went straight to her studio. Wendy was revising blueprints when she saw him walk in. She froze for a moment. Mr. Jason, why are you here? To revise the plan. Jason placed a document on her desk. A commercial real estate renovation. I need your design. Wendy stared at the document for a long time. Do you know my quote? I know. Do you know my schedule? I know. Do you know that I... She paused. Might not be able to finish? Jason looked at her and suddenly smiled. Wendy, just say it outright. You don't want to work with me. Wendy lifted her head and met his gaze. Her eyes were bright, so bright they seemed to hold stars. It's not that I don't want to, she said. It's that I don't dare to. Why? You're too. She paused, searching for the word. Too dazzling. Jason was taken aback, then laughed even more heartily. Wendy, do you know what you're doing right now? What? You're complimenting me. Wendy's face turned red. Jason leaned against the table, looking down at her. Then let's try a different approach. I won't be dazzling and you won't have to hide. How about we just be friends? Wendy looked at him, a hint of hesitation in her eyes. Friends. Yeah, friends. Jason extended his hand. Jason, 28, single. Hobbies are making money and looking at architectural models. Wendy stared at his hand, then suddenly smiled. Wendy, 23, also single. Hobbies are drawing and drinking coffee. She took his hand. Jason's palm was warm, hers was cool. In that moment, Jason felt he would never let go. The next 6 months were the happiest days of Jason's life. They reviewed projects together, revised plans together, ate meals together, and took walks together. Wendy liked to draw late into the night, and he would keep her company, sitting nearby and handling his paperwork. When she paused mid-sketch to rub her eyes, he would hand her a cup of coffee. "Why aren't you asleep yet?" she asked. "Waiting for you." "Waiting for me for what?" "Afraid you might get hungry." Wendy smiled, lowered her head, and continued drawing, but the corners of her mouth stayed curved. Jason looked at her profile and thought to himself, if only time could stop right here. That was something I only learned later. That night he walked her home. The rain had just stopped, and the air smelled of earth. When they reached her building, she suddenly stopped, turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed. She said, "Jason, aren't you really afraid of being dragged down by me?" He said, "Afraid of what? I don't have anything to lose." She looked at him, then suddenly stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was very light, like a brief touch before she pulled back. Then she smiled, a smile that looked more like crying. She said, "Then you'd better think it over." After that day, the thin veil of just friends between them was completely torn apart. Wendy began letting him into her studio, allowing him to wrap his arms around her from behind while she looked at blueprints. Occasionally, when they worked late into the night, she would fall asleep leaning against his shoulder. The moment Jason remembered most clearly was when she suddenly woke up at 2 in the morning and mumbled drowsily, "If you ever abandon me in the future, I'll take my blueprints and go to Paris." At the time, he thought she was just being clingy. He lowered his head, kissed her forehead, and said, "I won't abandon you." She might have been serious when she said that. A little over a month later, Wendy started feeling nauseous and drowsy for no apparent reason. She went to the hospital alone, got the lab results back, and didn't tell him right away. She thought it over for 3 days. What was on her mind? Her father's death still had loose ends. She was a fledgling architect with no stable income. While Jason's career was on the rise, his name known throughout the investment circle. After 3 days of thinking, she finally came to one conclusion. She could drag herself down, but she couldn't drag him down, and certainly not a child. Then the trouble came. That night, Jason received the call. "Wendy owes us $3 million. If it's not paid back in 3 days, you'll face the consequences." He hung up the phone and drove straight to her studio. The lights were on, but the door was locked. He knocked, but no one answered. He called her again, her phone was off. He stood at the door all night. He knew she was inside. The lights stayed on, and he knew she must have been awake the whole night too. The next morning, Wendy arrived. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. When she saw him, she froze for a moment. "What are you doing here?" Jason walked over and reached out to hold her shoulders. "Wendy, I know about the money. I'll pay it back for you. $3 million. I can take it out right now." "Stop it." She cut him off, her voice trembling, yet she forced her spine straight. "You helped me because you're soft-hearted, you're kind. You couldn't bear to see me at the end of my rope. But have you ever thought?" She finally lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed. "If I take your money, how can I ever stand tall in front of you again?" She took a step back, her hands tightly gripping the hem of her clothes. "Your money, I can't accept it." Jason's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles turning white. "Wendy, I've never once felt that you owe me anything, but I would feel that way." Her tears fell, her voice growing softer. "Every time you help me, I owe you one. If I owe too much, I won't even dare to stand by your side." "Jason." She took a deep breath, as if summoning her last ounce of strength. "To me, you're someone I want to be worthy of. But if I take your money, I'll feel unworthy for the rest of my life." Jason wanted to say something, but his throat felt blocked. Wendy finally turned around, her face covered in tears. That night, a torrential rainstorm broke out. Jason waited in his apartment all night. At 3 in the morning, the doorbell rang. He rushed to open the door and saw Wendy standing there, drenched through, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes red and swollen. "Wendy, don't look for me." She shoved a letter into his hands and ran off. Jason chased after her, but the street corner was empty, only the rain pouring down. He stood in the rain, clutching the letter, the envelope reading, "Jason, don't look for me." He didn't open it. What he didn't know was that she had already bought a ticket to Paris. She gave birth to Ivy in Paris, alone. She named her daughter Ivy, meaning contentment and happiness. Every day for those 4 years, when she talked about him to her daughter, she always used the past tense. "Your father, he was a very good man." And the first complete sentence in Chinese that Ivy learned to say was, "Daddy." Later, he searched for her for an entire year. Paris, London, New York, Tokyo. Every place she might have gone, he looked. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. After a year, he gave up. He locked that letter in a drawer, along with her design drafts, and sealed them away. Then he poured all his energy into his work. Yanqing Capital grew bigger and bigger, expanding from a 200-square-meter office to an entire floor at the top of Lujiazui. From a team of 7 to a team of over 100. From handling small cases to managing a billion-dollar fund. Everyone said Jason was a genius, a legend in the business world. But only he knew the truth. He was just trying to fill every moment, leaving no gap to think about her. Now 5 years had passed. He had a daughter, 4 years old, a prodigy who looked like him with eyes like hers. Jason stood by the office window, gazing at the night view of Lujiazui. In the drawer, that letter was still there. He took it out, looking at the handwriting on the envelope. Jason, don't look for me. He had never opened it, because he was afraid. Afraid that once he did, he would truly never find her again. But now, Jason picked up his phone and dialed a number. Michael, help me look into someone. Who? Wendy. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Jason. She's back? I don't know. Jason gazed at the lights outside the window. But I'm going to find her. At the same time in Paris. In a small apartment, Wendy sat by the window, looking out at the night view. On the table lay a plane ticket. Destination: Shanghai. Beside it was a photo of a 4-year-old girl, holding a bunny plush, smiling sweetly. Wendy picked up the photo and gently touched it. Ivy, she whispered. How is your father doing? Her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. She opened it and saw a text message. Mom, I miss you. Wendy's tears suddenly fell. She knew who had sent it. Only one person would use that tone, send that kind of message. Ivy, her daughter. She stared at the plane ticket for a long time. Then, she picked up her phone and booked a ticket. 3 days later, Shanghai. She was going back to face everything. In truth, she had thought about going back countless times over these 5 years. The night Ivy was born, she lay in a Paris hospital, holding that wrinkled little bundle, and her first instinct was to call him. But she held back. Later, when Ivy first called out, Daddy, she buried her face in her pillow and cried all night. As Ivy grew older, she started asking questions. Where is Daddy? Why do other kids have daddies but I don't? Each time, she brushed it off with Daddy is working far away. But Ivy was too clever. Her questions grew sharper, and she found herself increasingly at a loss for answers. What truly made her decide to return was something that happened last week. Ivy had a high fever in the middle of the night. She carried her daughter and ran 2 blocks before finding an emergency room. Ivy, delirious with fever, mumbled a faint, Daddy. That single word pierced her heart like a knife. Sitting in the emergency room chair, holding her daughter's burning little body, she suddenly understood. She had thought leaving was protecting Jason, but what was she really protecting? Ivy needed a father, Jason needed an explanation, and she herself. She was tired too. 3 days later, Shanghai. She was going back to give him the explanation she owed him for 5 years. 3 days later, Pudong Airport. Jason stood at the arrival gate, holding a bouquet of flowers. Michael stood beside him, his expression complicated. Mr. Jason, are you sure you want to pick her up? Jason ignored him. Just in case, Michael said cautiously. What if she doesn't want to see you? Jason's fingers tightened slightly, the wrapping paper of the bouquet rustling softly. Then I'll wait until she's willing to see me. Mikhail sighed. Ivy stood on Jason's other side, clutching her rabbit plushie, her expression serious. Dad, you've mismatched your tie again. Jason looked down at himself. A navy blue suit paired with a gray tie. Should be fine, right? What's wrong? Gray is too dark. Makes you look nervous, Ivy said. You should go with silver or light blue. Jason. He looked down at his daughter, then at the flowers in his hand. Is there something wrong with the flowers? Ivy glanced at the bouquet of white roses and shook her head. The flowers are fine, but your expression is a problem. What do you mean? Your smile is too stiff. Ivy sighed. Mom won't like fake smiles. Jason took a deep breath, trying to relax his facial muscles. How about this? Ivy looked at him for 2 seconds, then shook her head. Never mind. It's normal for you to be nervous. Jason. The flight information displayed. AF-116. Paris to Shanghai. Estimated arrival time 14:35. It was now 14:20. Jason stood at the exit, staring at the door. His heart was pounding so fast it left him breathless. 5 years. 5 years since he had seen her. He didn't know what she would look like. Would she be thinner? Would she look older? Would she no longer love him? Daddy. Ivy tugged at his sleeve. Your hand is shaking. Jason looked down and, sure enough, the hand holding the bouquet was trembling slightly. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. It's nothing. Why are you nervous? Ivy tilted her head. Mom's not a tiger. Jason looked at his daughter and suddenly laughed. Your mom is way scarier than a tiger. Why? Because... He thought for a moment. Because she's the only person who can make me nervous. Ivy stared at him for a few seconds, then lowered her head and fumbled in her pocket for the piece of paper. 1440. More and more people were streaming out of the exit. Jason's gaze darted through the crowd, scanning one by one. Not her. Not her. Still not her. His heart pounded faster and faster, as if it might leap out of his chest. And then he saw her. Wendy stood at the exit, wearing a beige trench coat, her long hair draped over her shoulders, a suitcase in hand. She had lost weight, much more than 5 years ago, but her eyes were still so bright, as if they held stars. Jason stood still, not moving an inch. Wendy saw him too. She froze, and the suitcase slipped from her hand, crashing to the ground. The two of them stood a dozen meters apart, separated by 5 years of time, by countless sleepless nights. Neither of them spoke. Then Ivy ran over. Mommy! She threw herself into Wendy's arms, her little legs pumping hard, the rabbit plushie nearly falling to the ground. Wendy crouched down and hugged her daughter tightly. Ivy! Her voice trembled. How are you here? I missed you. Ivy buried her face in her arms, her voice muffled. Wendy's tears fell. She held her daughter, her shoulders trembling. Jason stood still, watching the scene, his throat feeling as if something were lodged in it. He wanted to walk over, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground. 5 years ago, she left. Now she was back. He didn't know what to say, what to do. Wendy looked up, meeting his gaze through the glistening tears. Jason! Her voice was soft as the wind. Long time no see. Jason's chest felt as if something had struck it. Long time no see. For words, 5 years. Long time no see, he said, his voice much hoarser than usual. Wendy stood up, holding Ivy in her arms, and looked at him. The two of them locked eyes, neither making the first move. People came and went around them. Some glanced at them with curiosity, others hurried past. But in that moment, for them the entire world fell silent. Jason took a step forward, standing before her. There was less than an arm's length between them now. 5 years apart, she had changed a lot, yet somehow seemed exactly the same. You've lost weight, he said. Wendy smiled, a bitter smile. So have you. Jason looked at her, wanting to say so much, but when it came to it, he couldn't utter a single word. In the end, he simply handed her the flowers. For you. Wendy stared at the bouquet of white roses, her eyes reddening again. White roses. 5 years ago, the first flowers he ever gave her were white roses. Do you still remember? She whispered. I remember, Jason said. Everything about you, I remember. Wendy's tears finally fell. She took the flowers, lowered her head, and her shoulders trembled. Ivy peeked out from her arms, looked at Jason, and made a funny face. Then she jumped down, stood between the two of them and looked up at them. Wait a minute. Jason and Wendy both looked down at her. Ivy pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, unfolded it, revealing a hand-drawn chart. On it, scrawled crookedly in crayon, were the words, KPI Evaluation Form, Candidate, Wendy. Evaluation items. 1. Can you cook? 2. Can you tell stories? 3. Do you know Dad's favorite color? 4. Do you know Dad's most hated food? 5. Do you know where Daddy's office is? 6. Do you know Daddy's birthday? 7. Would you pick out a tie for Daddy? 8. Would you stay late at work with Daddy? 9. Will you go for walks with Daddy? 10. Will you always love Daddy? Current score. Pending evaluation. Jason looked at the paper, the corner of his mouth twitching involuntarily. Wendy, her tears still not dry, suddenly laughed as she looked at it. Ivy, this is the KPI evaluation form I prepared for Mommy, Ivy said seriously. Mommy has to pass the evaluation to continue being a mommy. Wendy was taken aback for a moment, then laughed even more joyfully. And, what if I don't pass? Ivy thought for a moment, then looked at Jason. Then Daddy can't keep you. Jason? Wendy laughed so hard that tears came to her eyes. She crouched down, pulled her daughter into her arms, and gave her a big kiss. Mommy will definitely pass, she said. Because Mommy misses Daddy too. Jason stood nearby, watching the scene, and something in his chest suddenly softened. 5 years. He thought he had gotten used to living without her. But now she stood before him, holding their daughter, smiling as she said she would pass the test. Only then did he realize he had never let go. "Let's go," he said, his voice very soft. "Let's go home." Wendy looked up at him. "Home?" "Yes." Jason extended his hand. "Our home." Wendy looked at his hand for a long time. Then she took it. Her hand was still as cold as it had been 5 years ago. Jason tightened his grip, holding on as if afraid she might run away again. "This time, you're not allowed to leave." Wendy lowered her head, tears falling once more. "Okay," she said, her voice very soft. "I won't leave." On the way home, the three of them sat in the back seat. Ivy was in the middle with Jason on her left and Wendy on her right. She looked left, then right and nodded in satisfaction. "Daddy, your tie should match the color of Mommy's trench coat." Ivy said, "That's more coordinated." "Jason," Wendy laughed out loud beside him. "Ivy, has your dad's tie always been chosen by you?" "No." Ivy shook her head. "He has terrible taste and I can't be bothered to care." "Jason," Wendy's shoulders shook with laughter. Watching her laugh, Jason couldn't help but curl his lips into a smile. 5 years. It had been so long since he'd seen her smile. The night outside the car window grew darker, but inside the carriage, it was warm. Ivy leaned against Wendy's arms and slowly fell asleep. Wendy looked down at her daughter and gently stroked her hair. "She is very smart," Wendy said softly. "Yeah," Jason said. 4 years old. Knows game theory and valuation models. Wendy smiled. "I taught her. In Paris, I often used project data as games to play with her, and over time she just picked it up." "I know." The two of them were quiet for a moment. "Jason," Wendy suddenly spoke. Did you open that letter?" Jason's fingers tightened slightly.
No.
Wendy looked up, meeting his eyes. "Why not?" Jason held her gaze for a long moment. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that once I opened it, I would truly lose you." Wendy's eyes reddened again. She lowered her head, looking at the daughter in her arms, her voice very soft. "I'm sorry." Jason said nothing, only tightened his grip on her hand. Outside the window, the lights of Lujiazui grew closer and closer. 5 years. They were finally home. The next day, Ivy officially began her assessment. First item. "Can you cook?" Wendy stood in the kitchen, Jason beside her, while Ivy sat at the dining table. "I want a croissant," Ivy said. Wendy smiled. "Okay." She began preparing the ingredients, her movements practiced and graceful. Jason stood nearby, watching her back, and suddenly remembered 5 years ago. Back then, she used to cook often, simple home-cooked meals, but every time he thought they tasted better than anything from a restaurant. "When did you learn to make croissants?" he asked. Wendy's hand paused. "In Paris," she said. "Ivy loves them, so I learned." Jason said nothing, but something in his heart was pricked. For years, she was alone in Paris, working, taking care of their daughter, and learning to make croissants. He had no idea how she had managed to get through it all. The croissants were soon ready, golden and crispy, with a rich aroma wafting through the air. Ivy took a bite and nodded. "Pass." She drew a big checkmark next to the first item on the KPI evaluation sheet. Second item. "Can you tell stories?" That evening, Ivy lay in bed, waiting for Wendy to tell her a story. "I want to hear Daddy's story," she said. Wendy paused, taken aback. "Daddy's story?" "Yes, how you and Daddy met." Wendy glanced at Jason, who was standing at the door, and her face flushed slightly. "Well, let me handle this," Jason said, walking in and sitting down by the bed. He looked at his daughter, thought for a moment and began. 5 years ago, I went to an exhibition, and there I saw a very beautiful person. Is that Mommy?" "Yes, that's Mommy. And then I went after her." "Did you catch up?" Jason glanced at Wendy, the corner of his mouth curling slightly. "Caught up." Ivy nodded with satisfaction, drawing a checkmark after the second item on the evaluation form. "Keep going. I want to hear what happened next." Jason and Wendy exchanged a glance, both falling silent. The rest of the story wasn't easy to tell. "After that," Jason began, "Mom went to work in a place far away and we went our separate ways." "Why did you separate?" "Because..." He paused. "Because Mommy had something very important to do." Ivy stared at him for a few seconds, then nodded. "So now that Mommy is back, you won't separate again, right?" Jason and Wendy spoke at the same time. "No, we won't." Ivy smiled and put another checkmark on the evaluation form. From the third to the 9th item, Wendy passed them all smoothly. She could pick out a tie, accompany him during overtime, take walks together, knew his birthday, and knew he hated cilantro. She remembered every single one clearly. Jason stood by, watching her answer each question one by one, and somewhere in his heart, it grew softer and softer. She remembered. After 5 years, she remembered everything. The last item. Will you always love Daddy? Ivy walked up to Wendy with the evaluation form in hand. Mommy, you need to answer this question seriously. Wendy crouched down, looking into her daughter's eyes. I will, she said, her voice soft but firm. Forever. Ivy stared at her for a few seconds, then nodded. Passed. She handed the evaluation sheet to Jason, all 10 items checked off. Daddy, Mommy passed, she said. You can keep wanting her now. Jason took the evaluation sheet, looking at the crooked check marks, and couldn't help the corners of his mouth lifting. Thank you, he said. I'll make sure to evaluate her properly. Wendy's face flushed, but just then Michael's call came in. Mr. Jason, something's happened. Jason answered the phone, his expression shifting. What? Derek has teamed up with 3 funds and started targeting our new project. Michael's voice was urgent. They got hold of our investment plan and are making moves against us. Jason's brow furrowed tightly. How did they get it? No idea. But someone inside must have leaked the information. Jason was silent for a second, then stood up. I'm heading back to the office right away. He glanced at Wendy and Ivy, softening his tone. You two stay home. I'll be back once I've handled things. Wendy stood up. Do you need my help? Jason paused, taken aback. I worked on some commercial real estate projects in Paris, Wendy said. I know a few investors. Maybe I can help you look into what Derek's up to. Jason looked at her and suddenly smiled. Then let's go together. Yanqing Capital conference room. When Jason walked in with Wendy, everyone was taken aback. This is my consultant, Jason said. Wendy, an architect. Michael glanced at Wendy, his expression somewhat complicated. Wendy said nothing, sat down beside Jason, and began reviewing the documents. Halfway through the meeting, Ivy arrived as well. Clutching her bunny plushie, she stood at the doorway and said in a baby voice, I want to help too. Jason looked at his daughter and sighed. How did you get here? Mom said no one was home, and I was worried. Jason, he had Michael bring a small chair for Ivy and let her sit in the corner. Ivy sat on the chair, hugging her rabbit, and began watching the data on the big screen. 10 minutes later, she spoke up. Dad, isn't that number wrong again? Jason turned to look at her. Ivy pointed at a line of data on the screen. Mommy said that patents lose value the further along they go. But on this table, it doesn't seem to have changed. Jason had the analysts recalculate based on the patent lifecycle depreciation approach. The result was 12% more accurate than before. Use this, Jason said. The analysts got busy, and Wendy joined the discussion. Leveraging the connections she had built in Paris, she quickly identified the investment preferences and weaknesses of the 3 funds backing Derek, and proposed several targeted countermeasures. Jason looked at her and suddenly felt that this was probably the strangest meeting he had ever held. His wife and daughter were both helping him fight a business war. But the results were surprisingly effective. Derek hadn't expected Jason to react so quickly. His original plan was to use the combined force of 3 funds to corner Jason's project and then acquire it at a low price. But instead of being passive, Jason began to fight back. However, Derek had been in the business world for over a decade and wasn't about to give up easily. Just as Jason's counterattack was starting to show results, Derek played a card no one saw coming. Through an intermediary, he contacted a core partner at Yanqing Capital, promising extremely favorable terms and all the resources needed to break away and go independent. That partner wavered and, at a critical moment, pulled the entire support team from a key project. When Jason received the news, he was in a project review meeting. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Continue." But everyone could see that his knuckles had turned white from clenching. Jason came home very late that night. Wendy reheated the meal for him and sat across the table, watching him eat. Ivy was already asleep, and the room was quiet. "Derek's being a bit difficult," Jason said, setting down his chopsticks and rubbing his temples. Wendy said nothing. She walked over to him and gently wrapped her arms around him from behind. Jason stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, leaning his head against her. "I'll help you," Wendy said. "You've already helped a lot." "Not enough." Wendy pressed her face against his back. "Tomorrow I'll contact a few more French investors. Derek's overseas funding chain has issues. I came across some clues when I was reviewing the documents before." Jason was silent for a moment, then took her hand. "All right." The next day, Wendy brought Ivy to the office. Ivy sat in the corner looking at data while Wendy made phone calls nearby. That afternoon, Ivy suddenly looked up and pointed at a set of figures on the screen. "Daddy, this company. Their borrowing is really weird. Jason walked over to take a look. It was the financial statement of a subsidiary under Derek. The capital flows Ivy had pointed out were highly suspicious in terms of timing and amounts. Jason immediately had Michael investigate. It turned out that Derek's overseas capital chain had serious irregularities. Within 3 days, 3 of Vision Capital's core projects were intercepted, 2 partners were poached, and the issues with the overseas capital chain were exposed, causing the stock price to plummet by 15%. Derek sat in his office, staring at the financial statements, his face ashen. "How did he do it?" he roared. His assistant stood nearby, head lowered. "Jason's team is formidable, especially that valuation model. It can accurately predict our bottom line every time. And it seems Wendy provided key evidence." Derek's eyes narrowed. "That model? Who made it?" "I heard. It was his daughter." "Daughter?" Derek froze for a moment, then laughed. "A 4-year-old? Are you kidding me?" "I'm not kidding." The assistant's voice trembled slightly. "That kid. She's something else." Derek didn't say a word, but his expression grew increasingly grim. A week later, Yuan Feng Capital stock price hit an all-time low. Derek couldn't hold out any longer. He called Jason, his tone much humbler than before. "Mr. Jason, can we talk?" Jason's voice was icy. "There's nothing to talk about. What do you want?" Jason was silent for a moment. "I want you," he said, "to never touch my people again." Derek froze for a second, then gritted his teeth and said, "Fine." Jason hung up the phone and gazed out at Lujiazui. Michael walked in, a hint of excitement on his face. "Mr. Jason, over at Yuan Feng Capital, the stock price has already fallen below the issue price." Jason nodded. "Keep watching." "One more thing," Michael said. "Derek wants to meet with you. Says he wants to concede." A faint smile curled at the corner of Jason's mouth. "Let him come." The meeting was arranged at a private club. Derek came with his lawyer, Jason with Michael. The two sat across from each other, the atmosphere a bit tense. "Mr. Jason," Derek began, his voice a little dry. "I concede." Jason looked at him, saying nothing. "Yuan Feng Capital, I can transfer 30% of the shares to you," Derek said. "As compensation." Jason still said nothing. Derek's expression shifted. "How much do you want?" Jason finally spoke. "I don't want your shares." Derek was stunned. "Then what do you want?" Jason looked at him, his gaze icy. "I want you to admit one thing publicly." "What thing?" "Admit that you lost," Jason said. "Admit that the childless fate you mocked is a joke." Derek's face turned very ugly. "Mr. Jason, this can't do it." Jason stood up. "Then keep fighting." Derek gritted his teeth. "Fine," he said. "I admit it." The next day, Yuan Feng Capital issued a public announcement. At the press conference, Derek openly admitted defeat in the bidding and declared that Yuan Feng Capital would undergo a strategic restructuring. A reporter asked him, "Mr. Derek, what is your opinion of Mr. Jason?" Derek's expression was complicated. He paused for a moment, "is an opponent worthy of respect." The reporter pressed further. "I heard Mr. Jason has a genius daughter?" The corner of Derek's mouth twitched, and he gritted his teeth as he forced out 2 words. "Yes." After a pause, he added, "I lost." After the press conference ended, Jason watched the live broadcast, a slight smile curling at the corner of his mouth. Michael walked in, his expression brimming with excitement. "Mr. Jason, Yuan Feng Capital's stock price has dropped another 5%. We can move forward with the acquisition." Jason nodded. "Get ready." Then he stood up and grabbed his coat. "I'm going home first." Michael was taken aback. "Home?" "Yeah," Jason said. "There's something more important." When Jason got home, he saw Wendy cooking in the kitchen. Ivy was sitting at the dining table, clutching her bunny plush, watching him. "Daddy, did you win?" Jason walked over and ruffled her hair. "We won." Ivy nodded, feeling the paper in her pocket. "Then I can give Mom a perfect score." Jason chuckled. "You haven't finished yet?" "No," Ivy said. "There's one last item. It needs Dad's confirmation." "What?" Ivy handed him the evaluation form. The last item read, "Will Daddy always love Mommy?" There was no checkmark after it, only a question mark. Jason stared at that line and smiled. He picked up the pen and drew a big checkmark after the question mark. Then he walked into the kitchen and stood behind Wendy. Wendy turned around, saw him, and smiled. "You're back." "Yeah," Jason said. "There's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" Jason pulled an envelope from his pocket, the letter Wendy had left him 5 years ago. Wendy's eyes reddened as she looked at the envelope. "You opened it?" "No," Jason said. "I wanted to give it to you in person." He He handed her the envelope. Wendy took it, her hands trembling slightly. Jason, she began, her voice very soft. Don't you want to know what's written inside? Jason looked at her and shook his head. No need, he said. Because I already know what you want to say. Wendy was taken aback. You know? Yeah, Jason said. You want to say you don't want to be a burden to me. Wendy's tears fell. How did you know? Jason reached out and gently wiped away her tears. Because I checked. The day you left, I found out everything. Wendy's body stiffened. Your father's debt. I paid it off for you, Jason said. 3 million transferred the same day. Wendy's tears flowed even harder. Then why didn't you tell me? I thought you knew, Jason said. I thought you would come back to me. Wendy's body trembled as tears streamed down her face. I didn't know. I really didn't know. Jason pulled her into his arms, gently patting her back. I know, he said. That's why I've been waiting for you. Wendy looked up at him. 5 years. You've waited 5 years. Jason nodded. I've waited 5 years, he said. Because I knew you would come back. Wendy couldn't stop her tears.
I'm sorry,
she said. I'm so sorry. Jason held her, his voice soft. No need to apologize. You're back. That's enough. Ivy stood at the living room doorway watching the two people in the kitchen. She hugged her bunny plush, a slight curve forming at the corner of her mouth. Then she lowered her head and added a new line to her evaluation form. The whole family stays together forever. Then she solemnly checked it off. She stuck the evaluation form on the refrigerator and ran back to her room. That evening, the three of them sat on the sofa. Ivy was in the middle with Jason on her left and Wendy on her right. A movie was playing on the TV, but no one was watching. Ivy suddenly spoke. Daddy. Can you not work overtime so much from now on? Jason was taken aback for a moment, then smiled. Okay. And also, Ivy continued, you need to spend more time with Mom. Wendy's face flushed. Jason glanced at Wendy, the corners of his mouth curving even deeper. Okay. Ivy nodded with satisfaction. Then I'm relieved. She jumped off the sofa and ran back to her room. Jason and Wendy exchanged a glance and both laughed. Wendy began, really takes after you. Jason looked at her and shook his head.
No.
She's smarter than you. Wendy laughed and lightly hit him. Jason caught her hand and didn't let go. Wendy, he said. From now on, don't leave again. Wendy looked at him, her eyes reddening again. Okay, she said. I'll never leave. Jason lowered his head and gently kissed her. Outside the window, the night view of Shanghai was beautiful. But the most beautiful sight was the person right in front of him. A month later, Ivy started kindergarten. The teacher asked her, Ivy, what does your daddy do? Ivy thought for a moment and said in her childish voice, My daddy is an investor. An investor? The teacher chuckled. So what does he invest in? Ivy tilted her head and said, He invested in my mom. The teacher froze for 2 seconds before catching on, then burst into laughter. And what about your mom? Ivy thought for a moment and said, My mom is an architect, but her most important creation is me. The teacher laughed even more happily. Ivy hugged her bunny plushie and looked out the window. She remembered that KPI evaluation sheet, now taped to the wall in her room. On it were 3 lines. Daddy, pass. Mommy, pass. Family, together forever. She smiled with satisfaction. Her mission was complete. Jason sat in his office, gazing out at Lujiazui. On the desk lay a letter, one Wendy had left for him 5 years ago. He finally opened it. Inside was just one line. Jason, I'm sorry. I love you. Jason looked at the line of text and smiled. He put the letter back in the drawer, then picked up his phone and sent a message to Wendy. Off work? Wait for me to come home. Wendy replied quickly. Okay. Remember to buy strawberry milk. Ivy wants some. Jason shook his head with a smile and stood up. He had made many investments in his life. Some had paid off, some had not. But there was only one he would never regret. That was 5 years ago on that rainy night when he met Wendy. He had been in investment for 10 years, calculated countless IRRs and NPVs, and chased after many unicorns. But only today did he truly understand that the most successful investment of his life was made 5 years ago on that rainy night, when he decided to pursue an architect. This investment has an incalculable rate of return and will never be exited.